Thank you. Senator Corker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Madam Chairman, thank you for your service and being here today. I, too, want to thank Mr. Tarullo. Didn't always agree with every decision he made, but we had vigorous debate, and I do think he was a committed public servant, and I want to thank him for his service, along with Mr. Alvarez. I know we were in the foxhole many, many times back in '08, and again, I thank you for your service. Madam Chairman, I was interviewed earlier today, and people have always sort of hinged their futures on what you have to say, and I guess it's somewhat thankful now that it looks like you have a little bit of a partner. We knew at one time there probably were going to be no changes here, not being pejorative, it's just the environment we lived in. And yet now we look at potential tax reform, we look at potential changes to the health care policy, we look at things relative to infrastructure and all of that. As you see those possibilities occurring, is that affecting how you look at monetary policy decisions moving down the road? A stagnant situation before, just again because of the environment, a very changing possibility policy environment here. Is that something that's affecting your deliberations?
So we recognize that there may be significant economic policy changes and that those changes could affect the outlook. We're very well aware of that. And we don't yet have enough clarity on what changes will be put in place to really clearly factor those policy changes into the economic outlook. So we don't want to base current policy on speculation about what may come down the line. We will wait to gain greater clarity on policy changes and try to
those policy
assess.
changes, though, once you develop greater clarity on what you think is coming down the pike, could in fact affect monetary policy decisions.
Well, it's one of many factors that could affect monetary policy decisions. So I think the answer is yes, they could. Exactly how depends on the timing, size, composition.
And growth,
Many
I guess, would
factors
generate,
affect as well.
growth could generate additional inflationary pressures, and so paying attention to that, and when that happens, it can happen fairly quickly, can it not?
Well, we will certainly pay attention to it. I think some policies may have supply-side impacts and raise productivity growth and sustainable growth for
You
the
mentioned
economy,
something
too.
about sustainable trajectory. You're hoping the administration will develop policies that cause a sustainable trajectory relative to fiscal issues. Is there anything that you're seeing coming down the pike or being debated that has caused you to raise that issue? I agree with you, by the way, but is there something you're looking at that caused you to put a note in there? Or is that just a standard line that would be in a report like this?
Well, I think we've known for many, many years that the U.S. fiscal trajectory is not sustainable, and the Congressional Budget Office's most recent forecasts show deficits increasing over the next 10-year period under their baseline, and the ratio of debt to GDP.
So nothing, it's just
rising.
the standard, there's nothing that you're looking at coming out of the administration or Congress that's causing you to raise that alarm. It's more just the standard concern that many of us have, that we're really conducting ourselves in a totally inappropriate way as it relates to deficits. Nothing that's being discussed policy-wise right now.
Well, I mean, some of the policies that are being discussed might well raise deficits, and in that context, they may also have impacts on economic growth and the economy's growth potential. So it's not a simple matter to evaluate, but I do think it's worth pointing out that fiscal sustainability has been a longstanding problem, and that the U.S. fiscal course, as our population ages and healthcare costs increase, is already not sustainable.
Very 100%. You gave a very fulsome answer to the balance sheet question, and I understand how the Fed funds rate is much more targetable and much more accurate. I guess what I haven't understood is just allowing the maturity In other words, allowing these securities, $4.5 trillion or so, just to mature and rolling off. It's hard to understand how that would create vagaries, if you will, relative to monetary policy that would be hard to predict. Could you share why?
Yes, I'm sorry, I did not mean to say that it would create a problem.
Yeah.
We want to allow that process to occur in a gradual and orderly way in order to...
Wouldn't just allowing them to mature, when they mature, they roll off, isn't
Yes.
that orderly?
Yes, it is orderly, and that's why we intend to do it that way. That's,
But you haven't started yet.
We
You're
haven't
reinvesting now. I'm just curious why. It just doesn't seem to me that...
I agree that it is orderly, and that is our desire, to have it be an orderly process, which is why we intend to allow those assets to run off as principal matures. So we recognize, however, that allowing that process to occur results in some tightening of financial conditions. And so before we turn that process on and start it, we want to make sure that we have adequate ability through our normal interest rate, overnight interest rate moves to meet the needs of the economy, particularly if it were to weaken some, which it would be a long process if it's running off, and we want to make sure we have enough scope and the economy is strong enough that that runoff wouldn't create a problem for the economy.
I just want to close with a statement. I know when you were coming in and interviewing for this post and being affirmed, you mentioned to me that when times called for it, you would allow interest rates to rise, and you're known as being a dove, but in fact, you are. I know some people have criticized the rate at which those rises have taken place, probably me included, but I do want to thank you for allowing that to happen, hoping it will continue as we return to more normal circumstances. Hopefully the balance sheet will roll off, and I hope you'll continue to criticize us if we allow deficit spending to continue more so than it already is today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator, and I think allowing that process to take place, that's something that will show that the economy is doing well, and the increases have been a reflection of the strength we've seen in the economy.
Senator Mendez.